I don't believe that a virgin gave birth to a human being. I don't believe that a kind God would allow innocent people to suffer. And I certainly don't believe that my choices after death are heaven or hell. I do believe that abortion is a right, God is a tyrant, and people often use religion to justify hatred. But if I wanted to disprove a virgin birth or find support for abortion, there's absolutely no way that I would have gotten through Genesis, let alone the entire Bible. I'm not a theologian. I'm a non-believer who happened to pick up the Bible and read through it cover to cover in the last 6 months of 2010. I wrote about my experience on my blog, Thump Me, every Monday and Wednesday, and admittedly, Thump Me was a little bit of a dig at the Bible thumpers who beat us heathens over the head with damnation in Scripture. I didn't read the Bible necessarily to find faith or to find God or religion. I did it for much more superficial reasons. First of all, my sister and I had had a tumultuous relationship for about 5 years, and she's a year and a half younger than me. And at the time, she was going to church. We grew up a non-religious family. She had gone to church as a kid with some family friends, and she was getting back into the pew. My reading of the Bible also coincided with a massive Facebook fight that we got in over status updates and friend request etiquette. So that fight kind of molded into a text fight, and then I wrote her a letter, and we stopped talking to each other. So instead of being mature, I thought, hell, I don't understand religion. I don't understand my sister. She's going back to church, so I'll just read the Bible. The second reason I read the Bible is because I'm a writer, but I never get biblical references, literary biblical references, which is embarrassing and annoying. And the last reason that I read the Bible is that I really wanted to get a better understanding of organized religion. When I was in college, I did the Buddhism karma thing, as everybody does. But I had never gone to church or read the Bible. And before Thump Me, I had had exactly 3 experiences with religion. The first was in 6th grade. I dumped candy in the holy water of my local church, turning it black and setting a rather rebellious precedent for my religious beliefs. The second thing occurred a couple years ago. I had a run-in with some ghosts in a cemetery in Ireland. And the third occurred, I don't know, in my early 20s. I drank too much before an outdoor memorial service, and I fainted during the service, and I woke up like this to a pudgy Midwestern man running at me with coffee and a sugar cookie. So even though my goals were superficial, my sister and I got over our Facebook thing. We don't follow each other on Twitter, and we're very careful with Facebook from here on out. I understand biblical references a little bit more, but as for the religion and religious tolerance thing, I'm totally lost still. But even though I didn't find faith in God or Jesus necessarily, I did find faith in myself, and that definitely came from my reading of the Bible. At the time that I started reading the Bible, my life started falling apart, and if I hadn't been reading the Bible, I don't think that I would have recognized what was happening or had the strength to do anything about it. So, one of the things that's really cool about the Bible's cool in a lot of ways. It's cool and interesting, but it's flawed in that it was written by human beings, and we all have flawed memories. I steal people's memories all the time. I don't mean to, but I take people's stories, and then I find myself regurgitating them with myself as a player in that story. So I end up interpreting things that are not, in fact, mine. But the Bible is one big interpretive dance. And as I said, it's written by human beings a long time ago. And so while a lot of the things in the Bible have been proven to be true, a lot of the dates line up, there's a lot of murky water, and I would like to believe more in the Bible. For example, if someone really killed somebody else with flaming foxtails, that is really cool. And as is the idea of talking to someone who is 200 to 400 years old, which also allegedly happened in the Bible. But one of the prophets, Ezekiel, realizes he's a prophet and does all his writing about the Bible after he hallucinates. So you can imagine how his interpretation of anything, food, water, God, would be different than you or I, for example. But before I read the Bible, I knew nothing about David, and he's this really tall, handsome guy that all of mankind is supposed to be modeled after. He's talked about in the book of Samuel. And as I was reading that book, there were a lot of things that led me to this conclusion, but I decided that he was homosexual, in large part because he spent a lot of time with young, attractive men and had a fetish with foreskin. But in this section of the Bible, he ends up choosing God has to choose between Saul and David, and he chooses David. So in my mind, that means that he is okay with homosexuality. My readers disagreed with that, and you won't find that interpretation in a lot of religious circles. But again, it's open to interpretation. So before we decide what we're going to interpret from something, we have to figure out what that something is. And when you're reading a text this big of rice paper and you're flying through it, that's often hard. Sometimes I had reasonable thoughts. Sometimes I strayed. During the begetting of the Old Testament, I got really bored, and I started counting how many days someone could have sex in a 30-day month if they went by God's rules. I came up with 9, and so while a lot of people were looking and interpreting the dawn of civilization in history, I was looking at old sex. And a lot of times when I was reading the Bible, it was really good for me, and a lot of times it made me feel almost suicidal, and some of that had to do with the text I was reading, and some of it had to do with my attitude, because attitude has a major impact on how we interpret our world. One day I was pissed at the world, and I was biking to MSU, and I got there and I had to read Numbers, and I was hell-bent on not getting anything from Numbers, nothing. But I opened it, and the whole thing was about this complaint department that God gave Moses for people who are pissing and moaning about their lives. And they got all these punishments, 40 years of suffering, thrown into the wilderness. And so these types of things happened a lot, these coincidences where something was happening in my life, and then I'd open the Bible, and it would kind of coordinate or correlate. And so it's almost like I would resist the Bible, and it would push back. But at the time that this was happening, my stomach started to go, and I started spending a lot of time in waiting rooms with old people who had, dysfunctional bowels and bladders, which was awesome. But what was happening is that my body was interpreting some things that my mind had been ignoring for a long time, namely my heart. When I was 21, I fell in love, and I never wanted to get married, but when I was 23, I married a really great person. We had a really liberal relationship, not in the swinging sense, but in the you do your thing, I'll do my thing. So we were creating our own definition of what it meant to be married, and I was creating my definition of what it meant to be a wife. But I always had these feelings like something wasn't right and that I wanted to be free. And so basically, I think if I hadn't been reading the Bible, I wouldn't have recognized these feelings, and I would have continued to write them away. Another thing that I find really fascinating about the Bible is the role of influence. The Bible in society and organized religion in society is the role of it, one of the major roles is as influencer. And we're all easily influenced, but we all kind of abide by a lot of the social norms that are laid out in the Bible. Some of them are really good. Don't steal, don't kill. Some of them are confusing, don't covet. I still don't understand that one. And then some of them are oppressive, like obey your husband, for example. But we all abide by these, and we have a lot of different reasons, but one of them is that we're easily influenced. And in the Bible, there's this guy named Hosea, and I thought he was a total wimp because his wife was cheating on him, and God told him to stay with his wife anyways, and he does it. So talk about influence. But in my typical fashion, when I was finished criticizing him, I started thinking about my life, my marriage, and the things that I had allowed to influence the decisions that I made in both of those realms. And I think in Western society, we're taught to think freely, but not freely enough to actually move towards deviation. So I don't know if it was that I was really young when I got married, if I didn't know who I was, if I was easily influenced, if I was madly in love, or if it was a combination of all those things. But I had always ignored this voice inside of me that this just wasn't something for me, that it wasn't something that was just right for me. So for about 5 years, I tried to fit into that marriage role. I tried to make it work for myself. And I continued to suppress that. But then along came Job, fear and faith. I can't remember why, and I never really got the point, so that means I missed the whole freaking point of the story of Job. But Job is this guy, and God just kind of like craps all over him. He takes away his family. He's just destitute. His life is just awful. And at one point in the Bible, Job kind of likens the human condition to one of a life of slavery. He talks about us being slaves, always looking for shade. So we go through the motion, we're zombies, we just don't pay any attention to what's going on in our life, we don't have a purpose. Well, eventually Job goes back to God, which just like broke my heart because I kind of had a crush on Job. He was like this outlier, and he, bucked the system, and then he goes back to God. But the cool thing about that story is it's a story of faith, and you either have faith or you don't, and that's when that really resonated for me in my Bible reading. So after reading the story of Job, and I had already gone through a major portion of the Bible, I started really thinking about the lack of faith that I had had in myself. And I kind of came to a crossroads, and I thought I can either kind of halt my life and put all of my efforts into this marriage that I thought was really good, and so did everybody else, or I can walk away from an 8-year relationship, an extended family I love, a life that I'm comfortable with, and throw my faith in myself and actually listen to this voice that has been talking to me, not in a hallucinogenic way, but has been talking to me for years, and just go out on my own. So a couple months after I started reading the Bible, my husband and I separated. In December of 2010, I moved back to Colorado, and I moved in with my parents. And I was set to read Revelations on Christmas Day of 2010. That was my last entry. That's the end of the Bible. And I decided not to read it, which really didn't sit well with a lot of my readers because I wasn't following through on my commitment to read the entire Bible. But I made that decision because I had finally found faith in myself, and I think that when you have faith in something, be it yourself, the Bible, your job, you trust it, and therefore, when you trust something, you don't need to know what the ending is. So I decided that I wasn't ready to know what the ending of that was because I was kind of opening up my life to whatever endings are going to come. That doesn't mean that I don't worry about my future. I live in Colorado, so I live in a state where I don't have any contacts and not a whole lot of friends. I live with my parents. I'm traveling around the world, but I don't really know why. I don't have a sense of place, and my professional life is kind of in a holding pattern. Do I know what I'm going to do with my life? No, I don't. I don't know what my purpose in life is, but I have confidence that I'll figure that out. One of the greatest things about life in the Bible is that it's all open to interpretation. You just have to figure out how you want to interpret it for yourself. So in reading the Bible, I found faith in myself, and I think that a lot of times when people read the Bible, they will regurgitate these really profound quotes that other people have written to make themselves sound good. So I'm going to say this quote from some chunk of the Bible that I can't remember that seems to be fitting for me. "Go in through the narrow gate, because the gate to hell is wide, and the road that leads to it is easy, and there are many who travel it. But the gate to life is narrow, and the way that leads to it is hard, and there are few people who find it." So since I read the Bible, I guess that I am allowed to say thank you and God bless.